And just be prepared if, we have employees walking around, or Graham's here again.
That's great.
So he might come over
No
and
worries.
ask me how to, Dad, how do I get this new character?
That's part of our story,
Yeah. Well, it's part of the whole, it relates to not just the COVID thing, but also as a small business owner, that's kind of the reality, there was normally Mondays and Tuesdays, I'd pick them up from school and either bring them here or take them to swimming lessons or do that kind of thing. And that's just the reality of small business.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have things to do and kids to take care of, and sometimes you just have to bring the kids with to do the work, and that's the way it's going to be.
Yep. I mean, you have to stick to your priorities and make them mesh when, your business and your family,
Right.
You can't lose either of them, right?
Yeah, you don't maybe have as much ability to separate, this is my job and this is my family. It's kind of like, well, it's a little bit of everything, which is, I always feel like, and you probably, it's the same way, is like, that's kind of the pro, it's a pro and a con, but I feel like it's more of the pro of, you start your own business, it becomes more, instead of this is your job and your career, it just becomes, it's a part of you. It's just much more a part of your life. It's like, well, this is my life. I have things I do. It's not a 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. There's things all hours of the day, every day that it's just, it's a part of who you are. It's hard to separate the person from the business, I think, sometimes.
It is in your own life too. Yeah. But you eventually make those boundaries when you start to see one starting to falter, right? You're like, okay, because you're not your husband, your father, you're a small businessman, but you're also a friend, your brother.
Right.
Well, actually, let's go ahead and get started. So, so we are at
hold on. Give me like 30 seconds. Sorry.
Okay.
I'll let you know.
Okay. I thought you're recording already. So I thought you were already doing live stream. I couldn't tell. So.
It's cool if I just go to the bathroom in the middle of this, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I'll just leave the screen, or just like.
I'll just turn my video off. We'll leave the audio. No, just kidding.
Did you see that Saturday Night Live with the Zoom meeting? It was funny.
Oh, I haven't.
It was
I did hear though that there was was it a high school or a college student who was on a Zoom call and forgot that she was on video, and then went to the bathroom, and I realized it was like, oh. I think she was a college student. It was a college student in a class, and just.
Yeah. Okay, we are live now.
Okay.
So we are here with Homegrown Stories. This is about, a lot of my friends don't understand why I'm in love with North Dakota, and in large part it's the people, and everybody's a hero here. And we are going to be as we're going through this really tough time, everybody is going to have their own hero journey. But Aaron Hill here has already gone through his hero journey. And so after this COVID, we're going to see how that journey ends. But let's find out more about Aaron Hill here on his hero journey up to here. As a small business owner, he owns the Fargo Brewing Company. So I'm going to leave it up to you right now. Aaron, help us fall in love with you like I fall in love with everybody. Tell us about yourself. So first of all, tell us about your family, where you grew up, and what you do.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me on, Shelley. I appreciate it. So as you said, Aaron Hill, co-founder of Fargo Brewing Company. I'm not the sole founder or sole owner, but was born in Minot. So that's where my great-grandfather actually physically built a house himself just west of Minot State. That's where my mom was born in Crosby, grew up in Minot, went to Minot High. Both of my parents, my dad went to high school in Jamestown, ended up going to Minot State. That's where my parents met. So that's where I was born. Then we ended up moving to Fargo when I was just about to start junior high. So I ended up going to junior high and high school in Fargo, and then went to college in central Minnesota. And I was kind of thinking of an interesting story back. Basically when I graduated high school, a lot of our high school classmates kind of felt like, I need to get out of North Dakota, right? Like I need to go somewhere. I need to, we got to spread our wings and we need to kind of get out of here. And I remember when I moved back, there was a serious issue with the brain drain, it was being called, of like all of these young people exiting North Dakota.
Yeah. What year was that when you were moving back?
That would have been, I think I came back probably about 2006 or 2007, somewhere in there.
Yeah. Okay.
and I remember I got involved with the North Dakota Young Professionals Network, and that was a part of why that whole thing started, was to, like, how do we retain these young people, these young professionals?
Right.
And I remember, like, at the time when I moved back to Fargo, it felt like my tail between my legs and going, oh man, I didn't make it, and now I'm back in Fargo, and I know all these people, and I see people at the store, and they're like, hey, I'm like, oh, I'm back,
Oh,
and
wow.
I feel like how different it is though from then to now. And to see a lot of those people, I will say, I think it is good for people to get out and kind of see what other things are like.
Yeah.
But now it's because they can see, like, they can appreciate what North Dakota is,
Right.
and what they have. And as you said, it's the people, it's the families, it's the friends. And to be honest with you, the opportunities in North Dakota, you think
Yeah.
about plenty of jobs, and to start a business, North Dakota is such a friendly,
Yes.
and I would say easy state, not from the sense that starting a business is easy, but
No.
just the state infrastructure makes it as easy as possible to start a business in this state.
Yeah.
I always talk about that. If you have a question for the tax office or whatever it is, you can literally call and you get somebody to answer, and they
Yes.
will say, hi, how can I help you? And you're like, oh, I assumed I would be in a waiting line for 4
Right.
hours, or I'd have to leave a message and I'd get a call back or a letter or something. But the state of North Dakota is really, really a great place to start a business and to do business.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because if you've never started, like, I was visiting with another small business person in Minnesota, also kind of, he works Fargo and Minnesota, and he said, like, it's so different. But go ahead. I love that you brought that up, because
yeah, it is very different, and being a business owner on a border town, we're just right across
Yeah.
the river from Minnesota. We see the differences in sort of regulations, and I talk to a lot of other business owners about the differences in starting businesses in Minnesota versus North Dakota. And I think it's very kind of advantageous. But yeah, I was just thinking about that, the kind of that concept about how a lot of us sort of felt like if you either stayed in North Dakota or came back to North Dakota, you were kind of like a failure, like you didn't cut it out there. And
Yeah.
it's interesting how that has changed so much in the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years,
So tell
really
me
how.
about that transition for you personally. Like, you came back, you're feeling like
Yeah.
a failure, but you really are one of our true heroes. Up to
Yeah.
well,
Yeah, and that's part of kind of the whole story of how Fargo Brewing came to be as well. Is
Okay.
so I ended up so I moved back. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was living in my parents' basement. Eventually, they started charging me rent, because they're like, hey,
Like a
like,
good North Dakota.
good North Dakotans, exactly. Like, you're not going to freeload. You got to get out there and you earn your keep and you pay your rent. And
Yeah.
so I ended up working for a bank, actually First International Bank, which is headquartered
Oh,
out of
yeah.
Rockford City. And I just kind of got connected through them and worked as a teller, and just thought, well, okay, that's a good place to start. And thankfully, they kind of recommended I check out the Fargo Moorhead Young Professionals Network. So I kind of
Okay. So
thought,
did Stenjum himself? I mean, did you know him himself or no?
I did eventually meet him, but he wasn't the one. It was
Okay.
our
Because
local
sometimes your banker
leaders
will give
who.
you some fatherly advice too, even if
Yeah.
it's the bank.
Yeah, and so it was my local manager who kind of recommended when I got
Okay.
hired, and he kind of said, hey, there's this Young Professionals Network. It's this kind of, business thing. We would recommend you kind of they basically said, we recommend you get kind of involved in the community. And I was like, oh, okay. So I went to one of the happy hours and just immediately just kind of like, it was like, oh, this is my people, and I felt like at that time I had come back, and I love my high school friends, and I love
Oh,
my
yeah.
friends here, but that was kind of like, I felt like the only people I know in this community are the people that I have known since we lived here. Like, I want to meet new people and different people.
Right.
So I kind of got really, really involved really quickly, and started kind of helping on committees, and eventually became the chair of our local Young Professionals Network. But
Okay.
kind of the thing I missed in between. So in between college and basically moving back, I bartended at a resort in the Minnesota Lakes area.
Oh,
So
nice.
that was how I sort of people kind of laugh when I say, like, I fell in love with, like, beer, wine, and alcohol, but in a true sense, that, like, I just was very interested in basically the products and how they were made and how
Yeah.
they were basically mixed. And,
The
it was
art
kind of
of it.
yeah, the art of it. And it was, it was kind of a higher end resort. So you kind of I had to learn my stuff really. I was like a 22-year-old. I had to learn about Scotch and bourbon and martinis and things that as a 21-year-old college student, you're not drinking martinis and
Right.
and Manhattans and those kind of drinks. But I really enjoyed it, and I was really interested in it. And at that time, my fellow bartender introduced me to Summit, which is in St. Paul. So that's a brewery in St. Paul. They've been in business for about 31 years now.
Okay, so that's a local brewery in Summit or in St. Paul?
In St. Paul, Minnesota, in the Twin Cities. And
okay.
So try this. It's made in St. Paul, and I kind of went, oh wow, and that kind of just, and I say that kind of changed my trajectory. And so, I continued to bartend, kind of came back to Fargo for a little bit. I thought maybe I was going to go to law school. I worked for an attorney in Fargo, just felt like law wasn't the area I needed to go into. So I went back and worked one more summer at the resort as my mom was so disappointed, and she's like, "We do it." I'm like, "I'm sorry. It's so much fun. I love it." I loved bartending. Yeah, it was just so much fun. And I loved the hospitality industry. And I loved, our name tags. We would have our name, and then we'd have, I'd have Fargo, North Dakota on it. So then, our customers could go, you're from Fargo. And then you start a conversation.
Yeah, it gave it, and that's important. That sense of place helps all human interactions. And if you have North Dakota, everybody puts you in a sense of place. It's like an automatic ticket to a friendly conversation.
Absolutely. And especially Fargo, Fargo is a very recognizable name, and a lot of people there, in the kind of Minnesota area, it was a lot of people from the Twin Cities, and they would come up and, start asking. They had some familiarity with Fargo or maybe NDSU or something like that. But so I basically, I bartended, and then I came home, worked at First International Bank, got plugged into the Young Professionals Network. And then I ended up through the Young Professionals Network meeting, kind of befriending a lot of people in the nonprofit industry, and felt like, well, that's kind of an area I feel like I would like to get into, and ended up applying for and getting a job at United Way in Fargo. So it was Cass and Clay County United Way on the.
Okay, one second. So why was a lot of nonprofits in Young Professionals? You usually don't put nonprofit and business together.
Well, I think a lot of the young professionals I met involved were kind of on the fundraising development side. So you think, the roles where building relationships is important, or community visibility.
Yeah. That's good to highlight, because that's the best way to do business, right?
And it's important. It's important, as nonprofit organizations to also get involved and get to know, because it ended up like my job at United Way. That's exactly what I did. Like my job was to develop and build relationships with the business community. That's actually how I met my wife. She was. She was. So my job was, fundraising, or on like the campaign, the United Way campaign. When I started, I think it was called Campaign Associate or something like that. And my wife worked for Blue Cross Blue Shield, or technically Noridian. But she was one of the people. So those companies have, they run their internal campaigns, and then they have people within those organizations that basically campaign volunteers, or we would call them employee campaign coordinators. And my wife was an employee campaign coordinator for the Noridian Blue Cross United Way campaign.
All right.
So I would go into these companies, and so I would say, okay, Tuesday. At Blue Cross, we're going to have these employee meetings. We've got one at 11, one at 11:30, one at noon, etc. And they would get their employees, and then I would be there on behalf of United Way, and we'd usually have one of our partner agencies. So one of the nonprofits that was receiving, funding through United Way would be there to tell their story. And so my wife was one of the people sort of coordinating that campaign, and so that's how we initially met, was through United Way.
So tell me, do you remember the first day you laid eyes on her?
I remember very vividly first day. So she was, I always tell, it's like the story of kind of how I fell in love with her, because we meet her, she worked kind of setting up all the things. And the first thing was her sense of humor. Like I definitely noticed, I'm like, she's very sarcastic. She's very witty. I'm like, okay, those are things that I appreciate. She'd had like a Band-Aid on her thumb or something like that. And I said, well, what happened? And she said, so I'm in grad school. So she graduated from Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota, got her undergrad in communication. And then at the time she was at NDSU getting her MBA. Okay. And she said, well, I'm in grad school, I'm getting my MBA. And when I'm studying for a big test, I like to go for a run And then she's like, so I went for a run. So another thing for me, I ran track and cross country in high school and still run
Were you
quite a
always
bit.
the mile or the cross country or?
No,
Like,
I ran cross
long
country
distance or
1 year, just 1 year, and
Okay.
I mostly ran like the 400 in track.
Okay.
400,
Okay.
more of a sprinter. I told my coach if he ever put me in the 800, I would just quit. I would leave the team.
Okay.
And now it's ironic because now I've run marathons and yeah. Anyway.
We'll have to talk about that too. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
So
Tell me about your running wife on the first
yeah.
date.
So I'm like, okay. So she's got a good sense of humor. You know, she runs. She's in grad school. And then she had, so the Band-Aid was, she's like, I was making bacon and burned my hand on bacon grease. And I was like,
I'm in.
yeah. Well, so of course at the time I said, well, typical. She'd had a boyfriend. So I was like, okay, you know.
Always the good ones are taken.
Yeah, that's exactly my experience. I'm like, go figure. It always happens. I always meet the
Yeah.
good ones and they're taken. And about a year later, we were going to we would do trainings for these, you know, kind of employee campaign coordinators. And her and I were sitting next to each other on the bus on our way to the training site. And I was like, oh yeah, I kind of forgot about her. And I did a little Facebook stalking and found out like, oh, the pictures of the boyfriend are gone. And I was like, interesting. So this is what I did at that time. We were supposed to be building relationships with like our job was say, hey, let's take this time to go and build relationships with these coordinators and take them to coffee, take them to lunch, you know, just kind of get to know them a little better.
Yeah.
So I asked her, I said, hey, you know, would you be willing to have coffee and we'll talk about the United Way campaign? And my whole intention was to see if she really was single or not. So she came with all her United Way stuff. Yeah, well, I thought I got to be careful because just in case I don't want to, you know, we still have to work together.
Yeah.
She's still going to be kind of there needs to be a business relationship no matter what happens. And basically we had coffee that morning and I kind of found out, I'm like, no boyfriend. And she mentioned, she's like, oh, I'm closing on my new house. And she's like, you should come over for a bonfire sometime. And I was like, oh,
Boom.
yeah, there's my door. I said, well, what are you doing tonight? We should have a bonfire at my house tonight, you know.
Oh, you were right in for it. Like,
yeah.
ready for that. You're like, okay, I'm in. Like, you saw the door and you're like,
yeah.
This is
So
part
she
of your
still, at that time, she still didn't think, she still thought it was just United Way Aaron wants to like hang out. She still didn't understand.
Yeah. And you definitely in a business, you do not want to misread signals like at all. That's a deal killer.
Yeah. So then but that night I kind of, I said, you know, I basically just kind of told her, like, I tend to be pretty open and upfront with people. And I just kind of said, you know, hey, you know, I kind of liked you from that first meeting at Blue Cross and blah, blah, blah. And she just,
hey, wait, did you tell her you remembered the Band-Aid? Because
I did,
then
yeah.
it's just like, oh,
I told her the whole story. I told her everything. Man. And and so kind of from that moment on, you know, we kind of knew right away, like we both knew it was like, it just was a good fit. We were both kind of in our late 20s and had dated, and, you know, we felt pretty confident in ourselves. And
yeah.
So we kind of knew. And then, we dated for about a year, got engaged. We're engaged for a year and we will be married. It will be 9 years this summer.
Awesome. And what's her name?
Her name is Brianne.
Oh, I love it. Sounds French.
It looks like Brienne, but it's pronounced Brianne.
Oh, Brienne, like were you a Game of Thrones fan?
I do like Game of Thrones.
Brienne was my favorite character.
Brienne of Tarth. Tarth, I believe.
Yeah, the tall warrior. Is she tall?
No, not especially.
Okay.
she's not 6'1" or 6'2" like the actress who plays Brienne.
Okay, so you guys got married. Did you get married in Fargo?
We got married in Rustic Oaks, it's called. So it's like 15 miles south of Moorhead. So it's on the Minnesota side, but kind of right on the river. One of those kind of rustic barn settings.
Perfect. Yep.
Very cool. Yeah, it was great. So she grew up in Fergus Falls, Minnesota, on a farm in Fergus Falls. So that was another thing too I forgot to mention of, you know, grew up on a farm. She's got 2 older brothers, you know, so she's not afraid to kind of, you know, work hard, and grew up with a good, strong work ethic.
Yeah.
And
what kind was it, crop farm or animal farm or?
Well, mostly crop. So, and he still her dad still farms corn and soybeans. He did have, when we got engaged, he had some cattle, but, you know, a small, not a big number. And he has since gotten rid of them. So now he just farms.
Yeah. Okay. So now you guys are married. You You haven't started the business yet still. You're still
Well,
working United Way at that time?
the business was kind of in the works, I would say. So when I was at United Way, that's kind of where it was the summer of 2009 or yeah, right around 2009 is kind of where the whole business concept started.
Okay.
So I was working at United Way. So now my business partner, Jared Hardy, he actually has a lot of family out in Beach, North Dakota.
Oh, hey, Jared and Jared's family out in Beach. I'm out in Dickinson, Killdeer, so.
Yeah, a
That's
lot of
knowing
parties out in
place
that
is
area.
important for us.
Yeah, so he and I went to high school together. So we'd known each other, for a long time. He went to NDSU. His wife went to Concordia as well. She got into dental school in Portland, Oregon. So they moved out there after undergrad. She went to dental school. He worked and then ended up getting his MBA with a focus in finance. So it would have been the summer of 2009. We were at a Red Hawks game. The Red Hawks is our kind of local professional baseball team, and he had just moved home, and we were with one of our other friends, and it was like, hey, it's, having a beer, kind of like, hey, great to have you back. What are you gonna do for a job? And he said, I'm not really sure yet, but I did when I was in grad school. I did make a business plan on starting a brewery. And he sort of said, I thought,
Really?
Portland, Oregon is like the craft brew mecca. And when he was out there, he sort of kind of fell in love with craft beer. And even when they would come home for holidays, he would bring a bunch of beer from Portland, and he would do these like beer tasting events. Like he would print sheets and bring glassware, and we'd all go over to his mom's house, and we were all 21, of course. And
Of course.
but we would go through all these beer samplings, and so he had basically done a business plan, and I kind of refer to him like, I love Jared, but we're very different. Like I'm the social, the young professional, the networker, and he likes to sit in dark corners in front of a computer screen.
I like him.
I call him the spreadsheet nerd. Is kind of the, we make fun of him a lot, but he is, he's got a good sense of humor, and he tolerates us very well.
Good.
But so he'd had a business plan and said, hey, it was so cool in Portland. And he's like, I just feel like that would be something that would be really, really neat to bring to North Dakota, and specifically Fargo. And at that time, there were no breweries in the entire state of North Dakota.
None. Oh, okay. So real pioneers here.
Yeah, and there were some breweries back in Fargo, in the Fargo area in like the mid 90s. There were some breweries. There was kind of an early sort of craft beer boom that sort of caught on in like California, on the coasts, basically. And a couple of people started it in Fargo, and it was just a little too ahead of its time, I think.
Yeah.
And so at the time he said, hey, there's no breweries here. There's a dozen in Minnesota. There's a dozen in Montana. Like you've been to Webo, Montana, right? Not too far from there. So like, what's the population of Webo?
Oh, I don't know.
Like
what,
400?
Yeah,
400, 500?
Yeah.
There's a brewery in Webo. We're like, if Webo, Montana can have a brewery, like how does North Dakota not have any, especially kind of the Fargo area?
Visiting and having drinks and stuff.
Yeah, so I was like, oh, that sounds like a cool idea. And kind of like, basically he likes to say he asked me to join him. I basically just invited myself along and just kind of said, yeah, this is cool. And
it's like that open little door, just like your wife.
Yeah.
Oh, nope, I'm not waiting for the bonfire.
It was just, it was this spark. It was this thing that just sounded, for whatever reason, just sounded really cool. And at the time I thought like, well, that would be kind of fun. Like I can be the, like, the salesperson, I'll be the community person. And it was like, yeah, sounds cool.
Okay.
So in the meantime, we're like, okay, all right, well, whatever. We got a business plan. We'll kind of start maybe working on this. Well, through all of my different kind of United Way and young professional things, I kind of started just talking about the idea to people, and sort of expected people would be like, you guys are idiots. You're so stupid. That's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. And really nobody did that. Most of the people kind of said, interesting. Well, if you need investors, let me know.
Oh, really?
Okay. So I'd keep going back to Jared, and I'm like, hey, I just talked to 3 more people today, and they all said, if we do this thing, let them know, and they would be interested in investing in this thing. So we thought, oh, okay, interesting. Maybe we're onto something. We had one very, very small problem that, can you guess what that would be by any chance?
Liquor license?
Well, that was one, but even more basic problem than that.
Money?
We had no clue how to brew beer.
Oh!
Absolutely no clue.
Just a detail.
Well, that's kind of how we approached it.
License.
Yeah. No, it was like, we'll figure. Yeah, at the time, it was just
that's not even.
it was just a fun idea, right? It was kind of this like dream, right? It's this like, oh, wouldn't this be so cool? It would be so fun to do this thing. This would be great. Not knowing any of the realities of it. So in the meantime, we're kind of working on it. He tried and brewed a few beers in his garage. Didn't go that well. But he ended up, he was out to dinner one night in Fargo, and his server happened to be a guy named John Anderson. And John went to high school. He went to Fargo South High School in Fargo with Jared's brother-in-law. So
Okay.
Jared was having dinner with his brother-in-law. So John and Jared's brother-in-law were like, oh, hey, how's it going? Haven't seen you in a while. What are you up to? And John had mentioned, said, oh, my brother Chris and I are thinking about starting a brewery in Fargo. So Jared went, okay. And Jared, got a hold of me and said, hey, we should maybe talk to these two brothers.
There's a door opening.
Okay. So John was still in college at the time. He was going to school at what is now Minnesota State Moorhead. Was still finishing up, but was in the service industry. He'd worked at some restaurants and bars. His older brother Chris at the time was living in the state of Washington. But Chris did his undergrad at Concordia College in Moorhead. He studied biology and got into home brewing. So he's kind of the brewery nerd, if you will.
Yeah, the chemist.
yeah. He's the mad scientist, looks like a brewer, big burly guy, big beard, just overalls and all that stuff. And big jolly kind of guy. So he went to Concordia. He ended up in Montana, lived in Montana for a few years, then went to Idaho and got his master's degree in fishery, like biology fisheries at the University of Idaho. And then he was out in the Washington State kind of doing research on salmon spawning habits during the day. And then at night, he basically started working at a brew pub out there. Just
it all goes together. Salmon spawning and collecting eggs.
Yeah, so he was just trying to get some experience at a brewery, at a commercial brewery, more of a professional brewery instead of just home brewing. So we actually all met on the phone. I went over to Jared's house, and John happened to be out in Washington visiting Chris, and we just met on the phone. And then at first, it was right around the Christmas of 2009, and we like to refer to that as the Christmas Miracle, where we all met. And so we kind of, at first it was almost like, well, this is what we think, and this is what we think. And before we knew it, it was like, okay, yeah, we all kind of have the same vision. And we realized, okay, there's four of us. It's like, we've got Chris as the brewer. Jared's going to be kind of the finance, the money. I had more of the sales experience, and then John with his industry experience too could kind of help on the production end. So we're kind of like Chris and John, the brothers, on the production side. Jared and Aaron are kind of on the business side, if you will.
Yeah.
And we very quickly agreed on the name Fargo Brewing. It was about a 5-minute conversation. We just said,
so this is the actual moment where you're really transitioning from just talking about dreams to like, oh my gosh, this might be a reality.
Yeah. And even at that time, I still felt like this is still just a dream. This is still this is still just fun, like it's not really going to happen.
You didn't have skin yet.
No. Chris packed up everything. We're like, let's do it. Okay. Chris packed up everything.
Wait. How many beers did you have in you before the end of that meeting? Like when
you started with 0. I probably not a ton, 3 or 4, I would say.
Okay,
probably.
So you're completely like just together. Okay.
Yeah. We're as together as
These aren't crazy drunk dreams.
No. It was pretty legitimate, and it's still dreams, and because we were all 20, I think I was 25 or 26 at the time. I think.
Wow.
Yeah, John would have been about 23. So we're all in our mid 20s.
Wow.
So but Chris packed up everything and moved back to Fargo with now it's his wife, but at the time I think was his girlfriend, and it's like, okay, this is getting more real. And then we took all of Chris's homebrew stuff, put it in Jared's garage, and every Saturday morning we would get together and we would brew on Chris's little homebrew system, and we would just kind of started working on the plan from there.
Wow.
And we got all the paperwork filed. It would have been 2010, I believe, is when we officially became the.
So that took about a year from the Miracle night.
Well, the Miracle was the end of 2009, so it took about 6 months. 6
Okay.
months from,
Okay.
because then in the meantime, Chris had packed up and moved.
Like,
He quit his job, quit his job doing research on the salmon, and said, all right, I'm going to move to Fargo and we're going to get this business started. So for him, it was probably more real. Still for me, I still felt like, yeah, this is still like, it's not really, there's no way we're going to be able to pull all this stuff together. It's just fun.
so you're so young, right? Like
Yeah,
business
it's just,
are older, right?
it's just a dream. It's just a fun thing to like give us this fun, like, I don't know, fun thing to do.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, we started brewing every Saturday morning in Jared's garage, and we just kind of kept like taking one step after another. As you'd kind of mentioned, at the time we'd started, the laws were so different because there were no breweries.
Okay.
The city of Fargo laws were much different. And so we kind of were like, well, how are we going to put this all together? And we ended up settling on what's called contract brewing. So that is where we worked with an existing brewery in Wisconsin, and we gave them our recipes. And we said, okay, you brew our beer. We bought kegs. We said, we will ship the kegs to you. You brew the beer. You put it in the kegs. We will buy those kegs, ship them back to Fargo, and then we will take and sell the beer from there. So we did that.
You didn't have a place then. You were doing that, and then they would sell your beer in different restaurants.
We would sell it.
But you sold
so
it
basically
to the
we would buy our correct
Okay.
self kind of as like a supplier, if you will. So we basically they
But
would
recipe.
they would brew. It's our recipe. We said, here's our formula.
Okay.
Excuse me. This is what we want. And then eventually they did bottles for us too. So we did do some bottles. But then we would take it. So it would say Fargo. We had to say beer company. We couldn't say brewing because we weren't brewing it. So it would say Fargo Beer Company.
Okay.
And then it would say brewed by Sand Creek Brewing, Black Creek, Wisconsin. So we did that. That was a much cheaper, much, kind of less risky way to start, because we thought, well, we'll see if people even care if there's a beer company that says Fargo on it.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a reason there aren't breweries in this area, because
Right.
maybe it's just not, people just don't, they've been tried before, because people kept asking us when we were starting, well, what makes you different than those breweries back in the mid 90s? How come those didn't work? Why?
Yeah.
If those didn't work, is this going to work for you guys?
Did that scare you?
No, not really. I think we knew our model was going to be a lot different than those breweries back in the mid 90s. Those were more like pub restaurant style ones.
Okay.
So they had they basically had a restaurant that also brewed beer.
Okay.
So we said, no, we're going to focus on the beer. We're not going to be a restaurant with a brewing equipment. We are going to be a brewery. That is our focus.
Okay.
And so, we basically started with this contract brewing model. It was a lot less money. We didn't have to invest in all of this expensive stainless steel equipment.
Yeah.
And so we did that, got that up and running, and saw a pretty tremendous response. And we did that for about a year. So we would basically, took the kegs, and then Chris and John would go. We bought a van, and they would just go deliver the kegs to the restaurants and bars. And we saw a lot of really good support from these local bars and restaurants. And we saw, okay, people do want a local beer, and they want a beer that says Fargo on it.
Yeah.
So then we kind of took that, and we did go through did a fundraising phase and raised some cash, and then borrowed a lot more. And we moved into our space in 2013.
2013, where you're sitting right now?
Where I'm sitting right now. We moved in.
Because it just looks beautiful back there. It looks like, well, a lot of money.
big, shiny, expensive stainless steel equipment. Yeah. So we've been here for 7 years. We got our first batch of beer out of here. It would have been in the summer of 2013. So it'll be 7 years this summer.
That is,
here we are.
I love it. But I want to remind everybody, you're doing all this and growing one of the best businesses that makes people proud in Fargo. So you built that, but all that time you were also a young family, or soon to be young family. So you actually have some kids, I think, also, or
yeah. So
just to put it in framework, like raising toddlers, having pregnancies, all that other stuff. During all that,
the timing was quite interesting of when, for just us personally. So So yeah, my wife was pregnant with our oldest child is 7, so almost exactly to the date when we moved in here. So yeah, it
Okay.
was a lot of life transition. So I basically put in my notice at my previous kind of day job. I had turned 30, and
Okay.
then our son was born on March 10th. So I turned 30 on February 28th. Our son was born March 10th, and then I started full time here the week after. So like March
Like
17th or whatever it was.
full
So it
adulthood in
was
just a
like
few months.
all this like, yeah, okay, I'm 30, I have a kid, and we started this business. I'm full time, and my wife works full time. She works for Bobcat,
Oh
Bobcat
yeah, I love
headquarters in West
Bobcat.
Fargo. Yeah,
Yeah.
she's been there. Yes, almost about the same time. She's been there about 8 years now. And
Okay.
so all of these just like big life transitions. And I think at that time I was in grad school. I went to grad school at the U of Mary, a good Bismarck institution that has, they have distance
Oh yeah.
learning
Oh yeah. I love.
in Fargo.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was going to, and it was just kind of crazy. And even before, I used to referee high school basketball. So I did a lot of the District 2, which is, Kindred, the Castleton schools, Enderlin,
Right.
Maple
Right.
Valley, a lot of those schools.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I was in grad school, reffing basketball, working a day job, trying to get this business up and running. There's just a lot of stuff going on. And then, yeah, our son was born 7 years ago. Then I came on full time. And then the first couple of years, I mean, as we were setting up all of our distribution network, like that was my job was, okay, we need to sell beer in Dickinson or in Killdeer. Okay, well, my job was to go and figure out, okay, who are the wholesalers? Who do we want to work with? So I was
Yeah.
on the road. I was on the road 3 to 4 days a week.
Oh wow.
And
Wow.
at one point, my wife literally said, "When do we get on your calendar?" I'm like,
Yeah. No, that's tough.
okay. So all the while we're like, well, we're trying to build and grow this business, and this is really valuable. We've got this big, we've got this investment, and we want to do this thing. And so yeah, it's really really difficult and challenging to try to balance, having young children, having a family, having a spouse who works full time,
Yep.
with
Yep.
starting a business. And I mean, and I would be lying if I said everything was always peachy and easy and great. I mean, there's been some trying times and difficult times,
Yeah.
but my wife is amazing, and she gets it too, though. She
Yeah.
understands, like, she said, I've been with you when you're not happy in your job, and I know how that affects you.
Right.
And
Right.
so I understand, like,
Yeah.
how important this is to my overall kind of well-being and happiness. And
100. I mean, you really, in times like that, especially when you really find out who you are. You're like,
mhm,
during those times, am I a businessman? Am I a family man? Am I both? I mean, you discover for yourself what you're made of,
mhm,
and the people that are trusted, like your wife, or, that they find out who they are too, and they find out who you are
mhm.
even more.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, and
and
it's and I've always been really really clear to my wife that I said, you and our kids will always come first. Like, don't get me wrong, I love our business. Like, I am so, like, ingrained and so dedicated to our business and what we do, and it's such a big part of my life. But I will never ever ever sacrifice her and our family for this
yeah,
business. So I was like, and I think that helps reassure her too, that I'm like, I trust me, I know where my priorities are, or where I know
yeah,
what's really really important in the
yeah,
grand scheme of life.
and
And if we can find a way to have both, and try to find that balance. I know that word gets used a lot, maybe overused, but it's true. As a young business, a young startup business,
yeah,
it's the balance is difficult. And I had mentioned before we went on that my 7-year-old is here now, since there's no school. So
yeah,
I've been bringing him with me to the brewery, and he's, we're doing the best we can. But sometimes that is kind of part of the balance, is I will need to bring the kids with me to the
yeah,
brewery. And it's, you kind of just have to make those things work sometimes, or take advantage of, I have the flexibility to pick up and drop off and take to doctors
yeah,
and swimming lessons and stuff. And so then
yeah.
my wife can kind of stay focused on her job too,
Yeah, but
which is
that
also
falls
important.
into, like, I mean, I wouldn't call it balance. I would, because I don't like that word either. Like, it's just like, you don't know what balance is until you
Yeah.
really know who you are, and
Hmm.
you know what your priorities are. and it was clear, and you have to make people around you know what your priorities are, and you did
Mm-hmm.
that. And I would even say that it's a blessing. I don't know if you ever read the book Iron John, but it was about that period where the fathers left the farm and they left the farrier shop, they left the blacksmith, and they were left at home to be raised. They didn't know what their father did. And that's where that separation between father and son, like in a certain area. So this might be bringing us back to that, like he's going to know the hero that you're his father's hero journey. As
Mm-hmm.
before, the father was outside of the home and they didn't know the hero that they actually were. So I think he's going to be part of his next hero journey in that connection, because he's going to know what his father did for him. You know,
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense,
It
but
does. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Is right. The father went out into the workforce and did the work, and then the mother tended to take care of the kids, and then the father came home, and that's
yeah,
a lot different too. We talk about that a lot, and I see that a lot with kind of that male female work dynamic too. Almost all of our peer group friends, like the females work.
yep,
And at one point it was so Jared, my partner, his wife's a dentist, and then one of our other friends at the time, his wife works in HR for a company in town, and we kind of sat down and all three of us guys went, wait a minute, all of our wives make more than we do, and like they're the ones with like the mortgage, and and we kind of cheersed each other and we're like,
yeah.
hey, so like it just how different that
It's
is.
real partnership. Yeah,
Yeah, it's just a lot different, and my wife and I talk about that a lot. Is it's not that she doesn't enjoy time at home and loves spending time with the kids, but she also really enjoys her job and work, and it's like I don't think we talk about, it's like I don't think she would ever be happy as kind of a stay-at-home parent. We've said
some
like
people are.
I would almost be a better stay-at-home
Yeah,
stay-at-home parent,
yeah,
or would kind of handle that a little better maybe.
yeah,
And it's just a lot different,
yeah.
and that affects a lot of the dynamic of us trying to start businesses and things like
Yep.
that too.
Right, right.
Is that there's still, like again, Jared's wife's a dentist, so there's still we have to balance, like, hey, or my wife in the last few years has been traveling a lot more for her job, so I'll be like, I have to figure out, like, or we have to figure out, okay, she's going to be in Chicago Tuesday through Thursday, so then I have to kind of block off my calendar and say, okay, I'm not available because I need to take care of the kids and do
Right.
that while she's away. And then vice versa, I will have, hey, I'm going to be in this market, and I'll be in Dickinson and Minot.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to be out in Dickinson and Minot in May. Hopefully that still happens. But
Well, you always have a place to stay.
oh, thank you. Yeah.
You don't have to waste money on a hotel.
So we have to try to
Yeah.
figure that out. And then so she's got to kind of figure out her schedule and say, okay, well, no, now, I'm gone. And thankfully we do have both of my parents still
Makes a
live
big
in
difference.
town,
Yeah.
and her mother lives in town. So we do
Yeah.
have good grandparent support to help us
Yeah.
kind of balance all of the workload. But it's
So
as I said, I'd never want to pretend to, like, oh, it's super easy and everything's
not.
always just
and it's
peachy.
not. And you see the whole all the generations are involved. You
Yeah.
have to have that healthy. It's just such a great story. We're about out of time. So you have grown to be one of the most beloved businesses in Fargo, and we're going through a hard time now. So you're obviously a leader, and on the other end of this, you and some of your other small business leaders will be the new vision of small businesses in North Dakota. So we're going to catch up on that hero journey in a few months, hopefully. But you were ashamed of North Dakota to come back, but something changed so much that you actually put real skin in the game. And tell us about your tattoo.
Yeah, I better
Let's see her.
It's just on my forearm here. Hopefully
Okay,
you can.
you see it? All right. Now that's a darn fine tattoo.
Yeah,
State of Dakota. Tell us about that.
So I've got, of course I have the state border, and then I have Fargo, a star on Fargo and a star on Minot.
Uh-huh.
And kind of starting this brewery in Fargo and sort of North Dakota. We say, yeah, it's Fargo Brewing Company, but still North Dakota in general is kind of our, like, core, focus and customer base. And a lot of our branding included sort of the state outline, or how do we incorporate, the state into all of our branding. And we had some cool kind of the state of North Dakota with a star on Fargo with like what looked like kind of sun rays going out, and it's like, oh, that's really, really cool. So actually one of our other employees has that tattoo on his,
Okay.
on his forearm, of course. So he gives me a little bit of grief about copying him, but I just said, like, I would really like, I've sort of like rediscovered this sort of pride in North Dakota. And I think for me, it was a big thing was like doing business in North Dakota. It's like, oh, it's not actually like embarrassing that I see people I know. Like, it's an asset. Like, it helps because you have relationships. They know me, they know my parents, they know my brother, they know my sister, they know my aunt, my uncle, whatever it is. Like I always say, when I go back to Minot, it's like, that's where my mom grew up and her siblings grew up, and where my parents went to college. And so like, even though we don't have any family left in Minot, I still feel connected. Like, I still feel like I'm welcomed,
Yes.
And so I think I kind of just rediscovered that. Like, I'm proud to be from North Dakota, and I love North Dakota. And it's interesting to kind of, as I get older, to kind of reconnect with, who I am and my history and my roots, and to go see my great grandfather's house in Minot, that I'm like, they homesteaded here, and we're connected.
Yeah, it's that sense of place that might be missing in some of our non-North Dakotans, that's like,
and I think people, you always have these people who they'll kind of trash on North Dakota and be like, you can leave, right? Like, you don't have to stay here. And you kind of always go like, and I've seen, it's been, like I said, it's been awesome to see a lot of my peer group go live in other parts of the country. And now when they are ready to have families and start businesses, it's interesting to be like, oh, so-and-so is moving back, so-and-so is moving back, and it's like, oh, there is value. It's like, we choose to live here because we want to live here. We're not stuck here. We're not forced to be here.
Right.
Like, this is a choice. And I would argue it's an awesome choice. And if people don't see that or don't get it, then too bad for them. It's good for us.
It's sad, but they'll come and they'll experience it, and then they'll know.
Yeah.
So come to North Dakota. So quickly before I wrap this up, it's challenging times right now. So how can viewers support you and other breweries in North Dakota? Do you want us to call our legislatures? Do you want us to just order some of your beers? Like, what kind of, like, maybe top 3 things that we as North Dakotans can help do to help support hero North Dakotans like you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I would say that the top thing is, if you do have a local brewery, if you're in the Fargo area, or you're in Bismarck or Minot, make sure you're out supporting those local breweries in any way you can. So if they're doing, like for us, we're still doing off sale, meaning you can come in and buy a 6-pack. And we are doing deliveries. So we will deliver beer to you as well. I mean, that's step 1. Take advantage of that. Do that in any way, shape, or form if you can. If you don't have that local brewery in your town, please go to the liquor stores are still open. So go to those liquor stores and find those local beers. But anything you can do financially to support those businesses, please do so. As of now, I mean, from a legislative standpoint, it's not much we can ask of people, but just support those local breweries and the local beer as much as you can, and your restaurants too, your bars and restaurants that are, because a majority of our business is we brew and package kegs, and then we sell kegs to wholesalers who sell to those bars and restaurants. So a lot of those bars and restaurants are also, that's part of our business too, if that bar has our beer on tap. So if you have those restaurants and bars, make sure you get out and support them if they're still open. If you could support them any way you can.
Yeah. Thank you for that. You're helping all of us small businessmen, and we will get through this because we're connected. But you're going to be rewriting history. So, not rewriting it, writing history. Sorry. You already have a great history. All right, Aaron, thank you so much, and we will see you later.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
You bet.